everyone, it's Vicki Weber from At Home Author, and today we're talking pros and cons of traditional versus self-publishing. Now, before we dive in, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button for recommendations on other publishing tips and tricks for the picture book world. So let's dive in. Let's start with affordability. When it comes to traditional publishing, affordability is where it's at. That's a real pro for traditional publishing because a real traditional publisher pays you, not the other way around. In self-publishing, it's actually quite expensive. And if you cut corners on things like editing, illustrations, etc., it's going to directly impact the sales and marketability of your book. The next factor to consider is financial risk. Another win for traditional publishing because in traditional publishing, the publisher takes on the risk. In self-publishing, you are the publisher, so you are taking on all of the financial risk that goes with publishing that book. Next is access. What I mean by that is how easy is it to get published? Traditional publishing is incredibly difficult to break into. However, they do all the work for you, and it is of no cost to you. They actually pay you. Self-publishing, on the other hand, anyone can do, but that also means that anyone can do it. So while it is easy in theory to get done, it is more difficult to do well. Now let's talk timeline. Traditional publishing is notoriously slow, but it's for a reason. They really vet the agents that they're working with, the stories that they pick up, the illustrators that they work with, and quality takes time. But traditional publishers tend to work molasses slow. So if time is a concern for you getting published, traditional publishing might not be the best choice for you. With self-publishing, you work on your own timeline, but it's important to keep in mind that rushing your release or rushing the production of your book is not always going to be a good thing to do. So you do still want to make sure that you give yourself an adequate amount of time to have the book done well and have the book launched appropriately. Then there's creative control. With traditional publishing, they won't make changes unless they feel they need to. But because they are the ones footing the bill and investing in you in your future, if they want something changed for marketability, you're kind of looking at making that change or stepping away. If you're committed to changing nothing about your book, then you might want to consider self-publishing because in that regard, you have complete creative control. However, please keep in mind that you need to get as much professional feedback as possible before you self-publish your book. The reason is because you want a product that will sell, which means you need honest feedback to make your book the best version of it that it can be. Sometimes you can ignore that feedback. I certainly have. But other times you need to listen to what people are telling you and make relevant changes. That's one of the hardest parts about being self-published is you need to find the balance between what to listen to and what to ignore. I'll give you an example. I had my book, Rhythm Rescue, and it is my best-selling book. But when I wrote it, I was really excited that the street that the story took place on was called Downbeat Street because in music, and it's a musical book, the downbeat is where a song begins. And in the book, Downbeat Street was where the story began, and it was a musical story. I thought I was so clever. I loved it. I was so excited, and I sent it to one editor, and they loved it too. And I was ready to go. And I sent it to another editor for another developmental edit because I truly believe in getting as much feedback as possible in the editing phase. And she asked me, "Why is it a sad street?" And I thought, what is she talking about? And then I realized downbeat is the opposite of upbeat. And the way she read it, this was a sad, depressing place that my story was taking place. That was not my intention. So while I was super excited about this, crazy, clever thing I came up with for my story, I had to think, how common is it that people are going to wonder, why is the street sad? And the reality was a lot of people had that reaction. Just because myself and my one editor understood the musical components behind my little cleverness, nobody else did. So I had to step away and say, all right, it's not Downbeat Street anymore. It's just Beat Street. And that's where Rhythm Rescue takes place. It's hard being an author. It's hard taking in this feedback, and it's hard changing your visions, but sometimes it's for the best. So you really need to be honest with yourself. You might not know best, and you need to sell this to readers. So readers need to be happy with the product you're putting forth. So keep that in mind as you're going forward, because traditional publishers won't ask for changes unless they really find them necessary. The next factor to consider is expertise. What I mean by that is traditional publishers do this for a living. They are professionals. They do this again and again and again. They have a method that works. They have it down to a science. When you self-publish, you don't have it down to a science. You're learning as much as you can. At first, that is. For some people, that's no problem. I'm willing to become an expert. And for other people, not so much. So it's up to you to weigh whether or not that's a pro or con for you. Profit potential is a big one. Now, a lot of people assume that you'll make more money in traditional publishing because they have the connections and they're paying for everything. Yes, however, they're paying for everything, which means they need a cut of those royalties. On average, a traditionally published author will make $1 to $2 per book. Sometimes more, sometimes less. It really depends on the genre, the publisher, all kinds of factors. But on average, it's $1 to $2 per book. In self-publishing, the average is $3 to $5 a book. Now, when you're talking large quantities, those numbers add up really fast. But it's important to remember that a traditional publisher is doing all the work for you. In self-publishing, you either need to do all of that work yourself or you need to hire someone to do it for you. So while the profit potential is higher, so is the risk. A lot of people don't know that the average self-published author never makes more than $250 in a book's lifetime. Now, I myself am a successfully self-published author. So I'm here to say it is possible. But you need to avoid the most common self-publishing mistakes, which I'll talk about in another video linked in the description below. What it also means is that you, as a self-published author, need to do the things that a traditional publisher does. They do them for a reason. They do them because it works. So if you're thinking that you need to go against the grain, swim against the tide, I'm here to tell you, if you want to be successful in self-publishing, don't reinvent the wheel. You don't need to. There's already tried and true strategies out there. There are already professionals that can help you. And there's already a lot of resources to help you learn to have a successfully published book. Finally, let's talk reputation. Now, this one is changing pretty frequently because the industry is changing. Society's view of things are changing. Right now, traditionally published authors tend to have more prestige than self-published authors. But I say that loosely because in today's industry, more people than ever before are actively choosing to be self-published. So this is one of those ones where it's up to you whether or not you really care about that. The default when I tell people that I'm self-published, they do assume, oh, so your story wasn't good enough for a publisher. Yes, there is still some of that with bookstores and things like that. But for the most part, if you are producing quality, it doesn't matter. While there are still some stereotypes of self-published authors and of traditionally published authors, for the most part, those are changing and kind of going by the wayside. Even some best-selling big authors are choosing to self-publish and traditionally publish, or switching from one to the other. So take this one with a grain of salt because it may or may not affect you. But to some people, that prestige is important. So it is something to consider when you're deciding on your publishing route. The other thing that I want to make very clear is that some people think that they can self-publish their book and that a traditional publisher will pick it up. That is incredibly rare. My chances would be better of being struck by lightning than that occurring to me. And I already am a successfully self-published author. Now, you might wonder why this is. The reason is pretty simple. If you publish a book, a publisher can't publish that book. You've already published that book. There are some workarounds. There are some exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, they're just not going to do it. Not when there are hundreds of other really quality unpublished manuscripts that they could spend their time on. That's a whole tangent I could go on. I'll save that for another day. But what you need to know is when you have a particular book, you're committing that book more than likely to that publishing route. So if you choose to self-publish that book is self-published. The only chance you have of a self-published book getting picked up by a traditional publisher if it is incredibly successful. And I mean wildly successful. And at that point, you might say you don't want it picked up by a traditional publisher. But there's so many people who say, I'm going to self-publish on KDP, and they have 10 reviews and they have one book sale a month, and they wait patiently for a traditional publisher to pick them up. And unfortunately, unless you're making over 10,000 book sales per year, honestly, probably more than that, they're not even going to bat an eye in your direction. Now, that's not to say that you can't be self-published and traditionally published. It's just that your one book would not be published both ways. So for me, I have many successful self-published books, but that doesn't mean I can't query agents with my unpublished manuscripts. You can be published both ways. It's just that your one single book is unlikely to be published both ways. If you want to self-publish to start out, what you can do is work really hard to get your book successful, and that might, no guarantees, help you secure an agent for your future unpublished non-series manuscripts. But again, there are no guarantees. There are exceptions to every rule, but statistically, when you publish, you are choosing that route for that book. I hope this has been helpful. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button for more helpful tips and tricks on publishing profitable children's picture books.